The following presentation is a gift from the team at Streamline Publishing, publishers of Fine Art Connoisseur, Plein Air Magazine, and weekly newsletters Fine Art Today, Realism Today, Plein Air Today, and American Watercolor, and events the Plein Air Convention and the Figurative Art Convention. We offer over 400 different art instruction tutorials and ultra high-quality video by the world's leading artists. If you like what you see, help us support our artists and our team with your purchase. Each video aired has a special discount code for today only in the comments section with a link to the video offered. And to see everything we do, or if you want to receive notice of new releases, new products, and new events for artists, simply click the other link, which says, "See everything we do." Thank you.
So what exactly is this global virtual painting event called Plein Air Live? Well, first, it's kind of like our Plein Air Convention. It's people like you who are interested in growth, working on themselves and on their painting and how you show up in the world.
This year's amazing faculty includes the incredible Jill Carver, landscape legend Scott Christensen, the incomparable Kevin McPherson, Catherine Statz, Joe Paquette, and many more to come.
Let's make our own personal growth a priority and be one as a plein air community worldwide. Hi, I'm Eric Rhodes, publisher of Fine Art Connoisseur and Plein Air magazines, and I hope you are learning and growing as an artist. Our goal is to provide you things to keep you occupied and to keep you growing. Today we have a brand new release. It's called Vibrant Landscapes, and it's with the incomparable Christine Lashley. I hope you enjoy it.
Hi, I'm Christine Lashley, and today we're going to be looking at water reflections. We're going to be painting in the studio. However, we're also going to be looking at plein air and how that is going to inform the studio paintings. And the big thing that I hope to get across to you is how to formulate your painting being excited about the moment that we experience outdoors. I've been a painter now since about 2013, working on plein air events mostly. Lately, I've been working a lot in the studio, challenging myself to work bigger. So this video could be both. It could be a video about plein air painting for you, or it could be a video for you about taking your plein air studies and working larger in the studio. So how are we going to do this? We're going to walk some gardens, get excited about what we see. We're going to dig deep and understand about water reflections. I have a lot of tricks that I'm excited to share with you about different ways to understand them so that when you are painting your painting, you don't get bogged down into copying all the details. You understand the structure of what is happening. You understand how to mix color. We're going to also look at how to apply paint to your best advantage to mimic the look of water, the glistening reflections that we're going to see. Although I'm from the Washington, D.C. area, I feel like I'm more of a global citizen. I've traveled a lot of different places. For a while, I was living in different countries every 2 to 3 years. And so a lot of the things that I've seen boil down to being excited about my surroundings with the quality of light that I see. And I think that's why water reflections get me so excited. There's just a quality of light that is very special about the fact that you've got different colors that are happening, and it's just a fun challenge to paint. Hi, we're here at Zilker Botanical Gardens in Austin, Texas, and it's a beautiful day, a lot to notice, a lot of colors, and the light is coming and going. So for a plein air painter, sometimes that poses some challenges. Let's take a look at one of the first things that struck my eye, which is these reflections of the building into the pond that show a really good example of how the reflections overall are much darker than the light building. So we have components that are reflecting, such as the red roof, the white building in sun or shade, and then the sky. So these different elements are going to all reflect darker. And you can see a little bit of the foliage that's happening, and that of course is a bright spot of green. So you can make a little shift in some of the water. The water is a little bit, let's just say it, the water is a little brown, but you can't go into, okay, blue water is going to be much better. So don't shift the color too much. If you're outside looking for a good scene to paint and you're thinking about drama in your paintings, there's the problem of making all of the effort to go outside and then it's kind of flat lighting. So that's kind of what's happening today. So what I always do is I look for areas of collected dark, a good medium shape that has some interest to it with a variety of shapes, and then a moment of light. So I am looking for the light, medium, and dark when I'm scoping my scene, plus the addition of good shapes. I'm always attracted to areas of higher contrast with value, looking for an area of strong light, strong medium, and strong dark. Here the water is a nice light shade, and we've got the mid-tone in the back and some really terrific dark shapes. These elements are really going to work to your advantage, even if you take the study back with minimal information in the studio. We're going to get started with continuing our journey for inspiration and how to develop our painting. After our wonderful walk outside, getting inspired, I figure that's always step one. I think it's really important to tie every decision back to making a painting, back to a personal experience that you have had. And my painting is going to be about a personal experience I had. And so bear that in mind when I'm sifting through the reference, when we're doing all of the visual inspiration with our photos, when we're looking at all the sources of inspiration. I like to cast a really wide net for my inspiration, and that includes going to museums to see paintings, looking online, might be even a friend's posting on Facebook. I think, wow, that's really neat how they did the texture of the foreground. Maybe I could try that with my scene. So I look at a wide source of inspiration. So we're going to look at some of the photos taken on location. I'm going to continue to look at sketches and studies and paintings that I did on location, or maybe even other works I've done in the studio. And I'm going to reference some paintings that Monet did, and Sargent and Lafarge. So we're going to get started by looking at some masterwork paintings that show water reflections. So when we're looking at artwork, either in person or with the photos online, that's such a great variety of things that they have online these days. I want to talk to you about the water that's been portrayed by these artists I really admire. So we have the Lafarge painting with the single water lily, which I think is really interesting. I talk about this also a little bit later during the sketching phase, because I think that it's a really great way to start tapping into the experience of being on location, but honing in on your individual idea and starting to understand the scene. So keep in mind always, is my object light or is my object dark? And you can see that Lafarge has got a white water lily, beautiful shades used here, and then lilies are mid-tone and the water is dark. And then other images that we have of Monet, I have several picked out here, just show different types of reflections. He's got some really terrific simplified forms, and he's also got some wonderful ways of showing what I explain with my basic sketches, where we have stuff going down and stuff going across. And we also have areas that will show if there's a large tree, we can see the mass of the tree and how much that is reflected. And that basic shape of top of the tree to the water line, and then again, the water line into the water, how much that reflects. It's going to be that same measurement. Then we get into some really interesting reference where we have a more complicated situation and a visual feast, no doubt. Sargent really brings out all the tricks. He's got areas where we can see into the water, and he's got areas of minor agitation to the surface of the water, and plus he's got foliage of the shore with interesting shapes, and then we have reflections. So he's pretty much got it all going on here. And that's just a terrific painting to look at for some inspiration. I did a painting in the studio based on my study of Darby Creek fishing trout stream. My Darby Creek sketch that I have basically shows the same type of structure where you can see into the water. And I did look at the Sargent painting for some inspiration on how he handled some of the colors and maybe some brush stroke marks. I mean, the design is really going to be different, but yes, I was looking at some of these paintings for some inspiration. And plus, it's great to see how somebody else solved the same problem that you're working on. Problem does not have to be a bad word here or an uphill journey. It could be simply, wow, we have this great thing that we're trying to convey and we're putting it on paper or canvas. And how are we going to do that? So again, inspiration finding. So I'd also like to share with you some projects of mine. I mentioned the Darby Creek sketch and then my final painting of that. So I thought it would be helpful to show you not just inspiration on how we're looking at the things that we're going to paint, but also how things have been created for me in the past, different projects that I've done where I've created these watercolor sketches, I've been painting on location, and then I made a final painting from that. So these might be different things of, I have a terrific photo and I have a terrific sketch and then I make a painting from it and it goes really smoothly. Or I might have to have, for example, 3 studies to work from to create a painting, such as my transitions painting, where I worked from 3 different watercolors, and they are pretty small in size, but basically I needed that reference for going ahead and creating my paintings. And I think this makes more sense when we're talking about the project that we end up creating, because in the end, it's going to be about what helps you to create a painting and what helps you to gather these ideas and bring some of the excitement indoors to the studio, because that's really why we're looking at all of this information, is how to bring that excitement back into the studio. I also have some paintings that I'd like to share with you that are specific ideas for really enhancing some of the decision-making process further down along the line with how you create your art, how you're going to create your studies, and these are really helpful tips for just really digging deep and understanding not only your inspiration, but other artwork. Once I fully understood these ideas, I actually looked at artwork in museums differently. I look at it differently online. I just really see the world differently. So we're going to examine this idea of bridges in between color. It's one thing to understand if an object is light or if an object is dark, and then build your background to support that. But there's you could look at it as beginner steps and then moving on to more advanced concepts. And the great thing about presenting these ideas is even if you're still working on the beginner steps, it's good to know that there's more information out there. And I certainly didn't invent all of this information. I've read a lot of books about this. I've taken workshops. I've had some very inspirational people who have helped me as either a teacher, a friend, or So I've had some really good critiques of my work too. So all of this has really helped out with just understanding what is out there. We have such a vast array of knowledge with the many books that have been written, and John Carlson is one, and any book on Sargent will show you his watercolors and his final oil paintings. I mean, wealth of information. So examining, let's look at this Benson painting. And if we look at it in color, it's a beautiful depiction of a woman. It has a great feeling of sunlight. And often when we just look at a painting, there's this, whether it's a photo or a painting, we just have this feeling of identifying what it is. We say the grass is green, her dress is white, it's a sunny day. These are all ways that our brain basically sorts the world. So if we think about this in artistic terms, we could say there's basically no darks, no full-on darks if we think about the value structure here. So if we imagine a value scale, it's not being used on the darkest level. So that would be considered a high-key painting, where everything is in the higher ranges. And also, if we look at the painting and we start examining some of the individual moments that are happening with the painting, we see that, in fact, we assume it's a sunny day and we want to reach for bright colors, but we can notice the space behind the woman's head is made predominantly of grays. So that's not what is normally expected when you just first glance at a painting and you think sunny day. You assume that every color is going to be bright. Now, if we strip the painting away if we take away the color, we could see that basically the woman's arms disappear, which is kind of shocking. But what this is doing is teaching us a moment where we have these two colors that coincide, and the artist is not describing the woman's form with hard lines around her arms. He is doing it with what's called color temperature shift, or I like to think of it as bridges of color. So in essence, the woman is getting married into the background, and we get this beautiful scattered shape of dashed lines along her shoulders. So I just think that's terrific. And that's a way to organize some of the information that we have in a really good fashion, I think. If we look at the Sargent painting of the woman fishing, the same type of information is happening, but basically he's using color temperature shift to define large areas of sunlight coming into the water. If we strip it to black and white, those areas merge together, and it's basically the shape of the woman against the shape of the water, and we know whether the figure is light or dark when we see it in black and white. And interestingly enough, it might be tempting to go into really bright yellows and a lot of areas of white, but you could see that he's used orange to define those areas of sunlight. And in fact, it's the same tone as the blue of the water. So these are really great tricks. It basically doubles your arsenal of colors and value that you can paint, because you're splitting a shape based on color temperature shift. Sargent does amazing things with not only his watercolor preliminary studies, but his oils as well. And I love looking at his watercolors in connection with the oils, and you can almost envision that he was just flipping back and forth. Maybe in the morning he did watercolor, and in the afternoon he did oils, and one really informs the other. And it's just fantastic to take these apart, enjoy them as an image, of course, they're wonderful, and we can look at the brush strokes, we can look at the color. But if we tease apart the value structure and start understanding this as, is the figure light? Is the figure dark? What can we learn from that? We see bridges happening with his adjacent colors, which is just terrific. He also does something that basically I think he has done the best out of all the artists that we can look at. You can see examples with other artists, But really nobody does the idea of warm and cool shadows better than John Singer Sargent. And he is just the master. And I feel like I've learned so much from him. I'm sure I have more to learn. But if we look at the collection of these paintings of these women wearing white dresses, you'll see in the one where the young girl is reading a letter to the woman, we see this great shadow cast across the dress, and it's got this wonderful blue shadow to it. And so when people ask what color is a shadow, or how do I decide, is my shadow warm or is my shadow cool, or what do I do with my shadows? We just need to get rid of the notion that shadows are gray. So that's not to complicate matters, that's to make matters more simple. And in my painting, you'll see I talk about warm and cool colors based on how the sun is falling onto the foliage, that it's engaging with the foliage because it's last rays of the setting sun, and some of it turns orange and other areas are going to be a cooler blue. So going back to Sargent, we see that nook shadow, this is how I think of it, nook shadows are warm, such as the folds of the dresses, and any open shadow, which would be, if you imagine little eyeballs on her dress. I know that's a funny thing to imagine, but there it is, best way to illustrate the concept. We can notice that the far edges that are away from the parasol are catching and engaging and could see the arc of the blue sky, and the nook shadows that is hidden from the sun and from the arc of the blue sky, all of those are warmer. All of those have orange tones, and this is going to repeat in many of his different paintings and also in his oils. Let's get down to the idea of defining what is water. This might seem like a crazy thing to talk about and way too basic, but I think this is very important. There's examples of where water has a mirror-like quality to it. And so there's three distinct types of water. One is you see nature presenting something like clouds in a sky, and then you could see it directly reflected in the water. And then you get into a situation where there's maybe a little gust of wind, or perhaps the stream is running along. And so the mirror reflection, and mirror is a great word because that is really what water is doing, is it is reflecting full on what is happening in reality. So with the mirror reflection starting to get broken, we get into shards of light, we get into refractions, we get into little bits and pieces. And also in disrupting the mirror like that, we're going to be getting shapes that happen and cut across. The idea of things going down and things going across, the idea of basically a gingham stripe or a plaid shirt, which I think is a great way to be thinking about just ways to always break up the reflections a little bit. So if you have an almost mirror reflection, be careful of that because you don't want to create an optical illusion that the viewer has to work really hard to understand. Water usually has some type of movement. And if for some reason you caught a perfectly still day, if you think about a lake or the ocean, that's kind of a rare event and it makes for almost a shocking photo. So it's not necessarily going to make the best painting that you caught this kind of bizarre, super still moment. It's more to the norm to have a little bit of water be refracted by wind or some motion in the current. And then the third type of water is when we get into the full-on series of cascades and a brook, and it can go all the way to full foaminess. And it's very interesting to capture that type of look where less and less of the water can be seen underneath. And I think it's just important to understand these as visual categories, because that way if the wind comes up or a boat comes by and disrupts your reflections when you're painting plein air, or maybe you didn't quite get the photo reference you wanted, or maybe the water is just too busy and it's maybe too flat. Then, based on some of my rules and my tips and my techniques, you can create a better looking water surface. So that's a great skill to have. and you'll be glad that you thought about it in a different way. I think value is widely misunderstood. We understand that the idea of a highly colorful image needs to be sorted, and a lot of people talk about value. Value is basically seeing something in black and white. We've already looked at some paintings in that regard. When you sort your photos, you can certainly strip something into black and white to fully understand it and think about your grouped shapes. So here's two terms that are used a lot, and I think they're really not very well understood. And it's not that people don't understand. It's that we just don't live our lives needing that set of skills. We just don't, unless you're thinking about composing a painting. So let's regroup and think about value and calming some of the chaos of highly patterned things, which is what we're doing when we create a study. We're going to think about this in terms of not only value, but also calming some of the chaos of different shapes. And we're going to be grouping things into mass shapes. These are all just incredibly important and powerful tools in making your artwork. And it's why I think people just don't understand the study. And I know, because I was one of those people, for sure, I know that. So I've worked hard on my studies, I've worked to make them better, and I've had to create kind of goofy tips to help me understand what is going on with all of this. So one of those is quite simply, I was a stay-at-home mom for a while, and I did a lot of laundry, and we had pink loads, and if you think about red and pink, you better know how to sort the laundry correctly, because I did not want to do all types of separate loads of laundry. You'd have plaid shirts and you'd have highly patterned things. And if you think about laundry as a skill set that you really just need on a daily basis, most of us would have no trouble sorting your laundry into a light, a medium, and a dark. And then you get into the pink or red situation, and I think I bring that up not just to be funny, but those are very strong colors, and how would you sort those? Would they be a light? Would they be a medium? Would they be a dark? Sometimes strong colors can get people confused into thinking that maybe they belong in the light category because they just reach out and they grab the viewer. Oftentimes those are medium or dark colors, interestingly enough. And you learn your mistake. If you put your reds and your pinks with the light load, then people have things that turn pink. So anyway, I have these photos to show you a jumble of clothes that are highly patterned and not sorted at all. And then if you strip that into black and white, we start to understand more what is going on. But interestingly enough, if you use the power of squinting, then you can blur all of the colors together. Things get radically simplified, and that plus the idea of sorting laundry, if you look at your reference photo and think, okay, I don't want to do lots of laundry here. I just want my light area, my middle area, and my dark area. I think things fall a lot better into place in that frame of reference and that mindset. So give it a try. In addition to manipulating your photos, such as changing the lightness and the brightness, or stripping it to black and white, or even blurring it to understand and just get a grip on what are all of those crazy, crazy shapes that we're dealing with. How do we get rid of some of the detail? Detail is really the enemy when we're composing the basic bones of our picture. So we want to reduce all the chatter, we want to get rid of the chaos, we want to just cut through to what are those big shapes that are happening. So I do things in my photo programs. They're changing all of the time. Phones are getting more powerful. So play around with a few different settings, or even just quite simply take a picture out of focus. You can certainly use that to simplify your image and find some basic shapes that way. Looking at these selection of photos, I'd like to break down the nuts and bolts of how water reflections actually work. You can see I've marked here the measurement of the tops of the trees and how much they reflect, and also this idea of stuff going across and stuff going down. is going to be shown so that you can start to understand some of the components. Here's a photo along a stream bed where I was really attracted to a collection of light colored rocks. They were in sun and shadow, and I wanted to understand more of what was happening with the shadows. And I really loved the reflections that were happening. I think this photograph illustrates that you can't see into the shadows with photos. It's next to impossible. You can do things like bracket your exposure, of course, or zoom in and take different pictures. But if we start understanding this idea of water is less than when it reflects, I think that we're going to get a lot further. And here I've showed you how the white color of the top of the rock is reflecting as darker, and then the dark colors that are the trees and shadow, in fact, reflect lighter. So remember, reflections are not always just darker, and it is going to be affected a little bit by sun and shadow. This shows with photographic examples how that idea can really help you to sort the information in your photos. So we walked around the Zülker Botanical Gardens. We've been looking at museum paintings and getting excited about thinking about what to paint. Let's finish figuring out what to paint and how to sort reference for our project by looking at a collection of videos and photos of the landscape. Here the summer greens were just really beautiful, and I liked the quality of light. I felt like for a demonstration I wanted to feature a little bit more blue of the sky, and I do think this would make a good painting. I might revisit this and do something different from it. And let's keep looking for a good reference for water lilies. So this is an example of what is not good reference for water lilies. We could see that they're just not collected. There's a bit too much brown happening. And I think it would be hard if I was going out on location, setting up somewhere, I would probably end up painting something else just because it's hard to get inspired by that image, even though the water has some qualities that are really nice. And also the lilies are just so equally scattered. It's not going to serve our purpose. Here you can see there's more lilies and they're more alive, and we do have some visual interest that's happening in this area, but there's just inequality to all of this. This area is equal, and we have just bands of horizontal lines happening, and it's almost just a complete scatter of dots, and there's not as many zigzag shapes or interesting things to make the viewer's eye move around. I liked this water's edge, even though this does have a lot of brown. It shows a good example of what happens with looking into the bed of the stream and then the fade of the sky as it starts to move up here. And you can see that our darkest darks are going to be at the base of some of this foliage. And interestingly enough, just like at the botanical gardens, at the Zülker Botanical Gardens, we saw bright green foliage, but it reflects as browner and more a little bit transparent, but all of the green has been stripped away from it, and it just becomes a tonal reflection. So this area of shore is darker and some of the cast shadow, but notice what happens here in the water. Some of the shadows in the water are less dark. This is important. This goes to the idea of the water as always more of a middle ground and not having some of those really high contrasts of light, and then not having the dark. The dark belongs in the reflected area and along the edge of the shore. I think we're getting closer for interest with water lilies. This was a great shot of, you could see the nuances of the colors of the lily pad. There's some variation in the foliage. We've got a bit of blue sky happening here, and I like this idea of the lilies crossing over the shadow area. And you can also zoom in a little bit to get a further depiction of just kind of focusing on our intent here. And I think this would make a great study. Let's move on to the project that I've picked for us today with sorting some reference photos of Cheverny. And here we could just see that there's a lot of information going on. It's very inspiring, and it's a beautiful place to be. And I've had a wonderful time painting there on location. But there's walls of foliage in front of you. There's trees. The light is moving very quickly. And here there was just too much vegetation in the front. And so I was looking for different viewpoints that would have just more of a feel of what I was looking for. This was a bit dark, I thought. Again, an exciting image, but just a bit of clutter going on. So we really have to organize that clutter and figure out what we're going to be doing. This had a great feeling of last light, and it's fairly rare for the photograph to be able to capture that. Usually that's easier on location. The problem is when you're painting on location, it really does not last that long. So that's always of issue. Now we're getting to the photo series where I really liked what I saw. I got so excited about this. I knew it would make a really good painting. I knew I could take this information back to the studio and do something just really great with it. And this is predominantly what I'll be using for my reference. And I'll show you the series of photos that is, there's about 3 from this point in time and this vantage point. And the things that I liked, I really liked this color of the water and some of the interesting shapes of the lilies. We could see that there is information, unlike the previous one where the white was kind of blown out of the blossom. We could see some information in there if I felt like I needed to zoom in, which is always a big bonus. And then by cropping, I get the angle that I want for this tree. I thought this had a lot to offer. We have those zigzag angles, and we have some subtle nuances, and the clutter of the foliage is kind of tamed and calmed down just a little bit. Plus I had the bonus, here's a couple of others from that series, a little bit more cluttered. Here is a great photo, and I thought the color here was the best. I just love this color in here, but you could see that the tree is missing from the top, so kind of a problem. Just to show you the on-location study and then a little video clip of what I was seeing. You see that golden light, it's just so wonderful. And I did 2 quick studies in watercolor. This just to capture the water's edge, and then this one to capture more of the full scene. And I was just hoping to capture something. That was basically my goal. This is a close-up of the one that you saw lying on the path. And I liked this area. I didn't feel that the top area was as successful, but if I crop it in, again, I'm getting back to what I wanted for my photo. And this photographed a little bit dark. It was better to work from in person, but I felt like I was really getting some good color relationships in this area. So just a bit more of the tree. So I have that reference as well. Okay, let's take a look at this series, which is how I start my really big paintings. This is a 24 by 36 based on some of those watercolor studies. Took all this information back to the studio and was working on this. This is so beginning, washy layer, midpoint, and then the final painting. Okay, so I'm excited to be working on some of those images of Cheverny and get my reference going and show you how it all comes together, brush stroke by brush stroke. But before we dive into the big painting, I want to just help you to understand a little bit more with the regard to, let's go back to that photo here. This is such a great photo just to show you the simplified forms of the lilies, and this reminds me of the John Lafarge painting where he really just focused in on one lily. And I want to be talking about ways to just radically break down our subject and understand this idea of a collection of lighter objects and then collecting some of these darks. So we're going to get started with some simple watercolor exercises that are meant to just help you understand some of the main components that are happening in the painting and the main ways of thinking that are going to be put into that final piece of art. Okay, great. So we're going to continue with our watercolor studies. And again, this could certainly be done in oils, but I just do it in watercolor because it's faster. I actually started as a watercolor painter and then kind of transitioned to oils. So I guess my brain sort of works this way anyway. And you'll see that my oils, in fact, owe a lot to my watercolors. And I'll be talking about that as I create my studies. First things first, let's talk about the issue of the study and also composition. These are what I would term not popular subjects with either my students or myself. I feel like I have to learn about this, and I also try to go easy on myself when learning about this because it's basically, I'm trying to make this fun for myself when I create my painting. The best way for me to think about what I'm actually going to be painting and what is the point of painting my image that I have in my head, this exciting moment that I saw. And that is going to quite simply be, was the object predominantly light or was the object predominantly dark? And what can I do with these shapes to make them interesting? Let's review. You can use a value chart if you like. That's certainly a good thing to do. Just mixing some burnt umber and French ultramarine blue here. That makes a nice neutral gray. I like that better than Payne's gray for my palette. To keep in mind, I have light, medium, and you could even do your value study, your sketch, your composition, whatever you want to say today visually with your big shapes. Whatever you want to say could really be done with just these two. However, this is where we want to get to, and this is where oil can go very quickly. That is your dark range. Watercolor for me helps me to stay in this lighter range. Watercolor does the lighter range very easily, and it's harder to get this dark color, and quite simply you just use less water when you're mixing with that. You can see here on the palette it's forming, I think of this as like a toothpaste mixture versus this mixture here which has a lot more water in it. So this will get not only dark, but you can get really dark with that. So this is basically all we need, 1, 2, 3. We looked at the lilies, we saw some interesting stuff. We saw the water's edge. There were a lot of great visual shapes to explore. And for the project at hand, another way that I can break this down and make it even simpler is not only pick what is dark and what is light, but let's go a little bit smaller. It could be just about one blooming lily and a pad. And maybe I could build a whole just study around that, just to get the wiggles out, right? So here's my pad, here's a lily and a bloom. That's what I should have said. And another one here. And so what can I do to these shapes to make them interesting? I don't have a bounding box. They're not really relating to each other quite yet. A good thing that I have going on is I'm linking my shapes together. That's really important versus keeping something separated. This is a little bit too separated. It's always better if you can link your shapes together. And so this gets back to what is light, what is medium, and what is dark. And oftentimes what we saw at the gardens is the lily itself that is blooming, the blossom or the buds. Let's make a little bud here. How fun. But those are in fact a bit lighter, and then we want to have everything else darker, and that can just simplify matters. And another reason watercolor is good is that I just want to keep this in the light range. I want to remind myself to keep that in the light range. You can even give it a little spritz and just keep it lifted out. It creates a little texture. You don't have to have that if you don't want to. Remember, this is a study. Nobody's grading you on this. It's so that you start understanding what in fact is happening with your scene so that you can understand those big shapes. Big shapes are so important. Big shapes, linked shapes, And I like this idea of doing what is important to the scene, which is the lily pad and the blossom, and then supporting that with my darks. This is what I saw on location. So these are a bit equal. I could do things like shave this down a little bit. So go easy on yourself. Remember, nobody is critiquing your sketch. This is for you. This is for you to understand what we're seeing. Do you like the aspect of all of these things as light and all of the supporting role of the water as being dark? You could certainly do another study and flip that. Even though in the beginning I talked about, hey, we're going to do composition and we're going to understand this and we're going to understand that. This to me is one of the most basic ways to just, I guess, make friends with your subject and start discovering visually what you saw. Even at this really early stage, there are some things that I like, and then there's some things that I'm not so thrilled about. But the point is that I have learned something just by the very fact that I did this quick study, and it was a non-judgmental thing about, I'm just going to push paint around, I'm going to link this to my values, see if they make sense, and see if I can start to understand and break down my subject. So again, is my object light? Okay, then everything else is darker. And then just quite simply zooming in and linking your shapes. And this would also be very similar to the Lafarge painting, where he's got the single blossom and then the supporting role of the lily pads, which I think is a beautiful piece of art. We could continue to noodle this and add details, but the point's been made, and that's all we really need to do, is just to start understanding that. Okay, so we've talked about what is the most basic step, and for beginners, I would totally encourage you to work on something like this. Zoom into your scene, really understand what is light, medium, and dark, and try to strip all detail out of your study. So I'm going to start moving through different studies to understand our project for today, and that's going to include some compositional things. Finally, we will talk about that. And also, we're going to really understand the nature of water reflections. And I'm going to show some, just, I think of them as icon studies, and I like to have that in my brain when I'm on location. The wind can come up and it can take away, those beautiful reflections that you saw, or maybe the cloud cover comes and everything's all different. So making a hierarchy of what you saw, is your object light, is your object dark, those types of thought patterns are going to be essential for creating good studies when we come back to the studio. Notice I have a lot of other pieces of equipment here. This is for my plein air work. I might actually do some sketching. This is a mechanical pencil. You can pick up any old pencil. I have a pen in here. I have another brush. This is a folding brush that it nests in on itself. Super handy for traveling. Usually any cafe will give you an extra glass of water. Or you could dip it in the pond and sit on a bench and you have your water all set. And all of these exciting colors are terrific, but in fact I use mostly for my studies my French ultramarine and my burnt umber. So those are kind of the workhorse colors. And if you look, you can see why I don't have black on my palette or Payne's Gray. I know everybody loves Payne's Gray, but not me. I have varieties of burnt umber here and varieties of the French ultramarine, and this nice middle ground is where all of my grays and neutrals come into play. Even though I would consider myself a colorist painter and enjoying light, enjoying bounced reflections, everything that has to do with color, it's really understanding value and doing some of the work that we're going to be doing today that has made all the difference, I think, in my paintings, because in order to fully have the power of color on your side, you have to understand value as to how it relates to color. So again, that's what we're going to be continuing to understand and build the painting basically from the sketch up. Here we go. Let's do another little study. Now we're going to get a bit into color. This is going to be based on what we had before, which was the very simple study. Actually, we could do it right here. Got enough room. I'll show you how understanding your value, understanding this very simple study. We're going to pan out just a little bit more from the water lilies. And I am doing this from memory. It's important for me to be working on the shape, working on the color relationships, just from kind of what I saw. I can always go back to photos, but I want to just get some color relationships, shapes, and things like that down on paper and just sort through them. Some of them are going to be good and some of them won't be as good. And that's the purpose of studies. Let's just I've mixed some green. This is Hooker's green. An equivalent in oil would be sap green, or you can certainly mix some blue and some yellow to come up with this color. And for watercolor, we have the luxury of adding water to make it lighter. With oil, you would just add white to this. So let me do some lily pads here. We're gonna have a mini lesson in drawing too right now. If I have a lily pad that is round, basically this is not going to be the correct shape for predominantly what we're going to see in our reference photos. We want to do more of an oblong shape. And in fact, don't be too concerned with having your edges be so roundy round. You can see that this one actually looks a little better than that one, and the edge, because if you think of this as kind of a modified football, or what I think of as instead of a C, which it was before, you make it more of a bracket or an element of a Z. This is always going to be better for landscapes versus this type of shape. And for doing your lily pads, just go ahead and stack them. You see how these are merged together. And as they move back in space, they're going to get smaller. So front of the water, back of the water, they're getting smaller. If you have a lot of single dots and they're evenly spaced, maybe this is too pale to show up, you can see that this scattering is not nearly as exciting visually to look at as this grouping. In a painting, these are some really helpful comments to have in your brain, and that is we want unity yet variety. And we want to get the chaos in order. So that means grouping some of your shapes and understanding how all of that comes together into these lumpy masses that are of similar value in this range. Let's make these some good groupings. And in general, you want to avoid 50-50. So if this is really my painting, are the lily pads going to be 50% of the painting and then the water is 50%? Uh-oh, maybe so. So what can I do about that? We could add more lilies. And in fact, this one's a little big. I say lilies, but I'm really, I guess, talking about the lily pads. And I'm not so concerned with blossoms at this point. I mean, those are always fun to add, but all right, let's get a dark. I'm just mixing some French Ultra with the burnt umber. Going a bit heavy on the French Ultra. Kind of creates a denim blue color, which is really nice for the water. And let's just double check that value. For example, you can see that these two colors resting together are both in the medium range. So nothing has any punch. It's not working very well. Got to make one lighter or one darker. Remember the trick up here, you can always tap out a little bit. Thank you, watercolor. All right, let's get this nice and dark. And with watercolor, you have two chances to make your shape. This would be the same for oil. You could create this green shape and just have this be on the white canvas, or you could use a toned canvas if you feel more comfortable with that. And I can just shave down these shapes. The color is a bit wet. I don't mind if it bleeds, it's fine. Here's where equal shape is happening. Just gonna go around that. Okay, here's where some fun can come into play. If I do something like this, all of a sudden I might have created a blossom of a lily. But remember, this is not a final painting. I'm supposed to be just creating a study. So let's get busy just filling in some of these empty spaces. We'll just, have this chopped into place. We've got to get a painting done too. All right, so what ended up happening? When I have some full coverage here, I would say this probably isn't as dark as I could have it, and I might also want to play with my design. Let's have a little bit more water. Just go right over that. Now this is definitely where watercolor has an advantage, because with oil you'd have a tiny bit of murkiness going on there. This would be mixing, but there's ways to overcome that too. More on that later. And let's just augment some of that dark. Let's play with that. Let's get in some super dark reflections. So we want to just have this. We're going to understand the concepts of what I'm painting here, because I'm just tossing out shapes right now. This would be basically the sky. Here's the lily pad itself. Then we have the sky reflected, and oftentimes we'll have a tree that is going to reflect in the water. So that's what I'm playing around with now. Things are starting to happen. I think we could do a painting that is a little bit more close focus here. And you could see the color range is pretty minimal. Let's get some smaller elements. This is interesting too for a study. I like to remember we talked about avoiding halvesies. We don't want to have half lily, half water. We don't want to necessarily have the picture plane divided in half. Here I've got some thirds. Also, there's this idea of a lot of whatever it is, a lot of water, and maybe a little bit of implied landmass coming in. So that would be the trees. And another way to describe that, if that sounds confusing, is that I like to have big, fat, chunky elements and then some smaller, thin elements. That will come into play with the painting where, especially with oil, I think it's harder to get some smaller kind of sparkle elements that are happening, maybe to have the brush on a chisel point and avoid that. I think I kind of went a little overboard on these dots. Let's take a few out so that the ones that are left mean more. There, for a study, I think that's better. Okay, great. So we're going to keep progressing. We're going to keep panning out of our scene, and we're going to take in the big view, which is what I'm going to do for you for the final painting. Now, the reason that I chose this other type of view is quite simply I did some studies and I had an idea in my head of what I wanted to say. Could you do a painting based on these other studies here? Of course. And in fact, I have done some paintings of water lilies that had this type of a little bit more close focus viewpoint. Nothing wrong with that. When we're working on this bigger painting, I'm going to strip it down to black and white before I approach the color. Let's talk about good and bad design. We already talked about halvesies and avoiding that. So I'm not going to want this to be the water area and this to be the landmass area. I'm going to choose to raise up my horizon line. This is going to avoid that half point. Already better. So you want to watch your intervals. I also don't want 1/3, 1/3, 1/3, even though technically that's better. I want to introduce a different element. So I'm going to be working with a diagonal line here, maybe even raise that up a little bit. I'm going to have most of this be darker. This study is not going to win any design awards. It's not going to impress anybody with, wow, that's what you did in art class today. Remember, the whole point of the studies is to understand what is happening with your subject. Are you entertained with the shapes that are happening? Does the value stay true to the scene that you saw? That's really the only point of the studies. I used to feel guilty that my studies were not better looking, but I understand now that it's part of the work in progress. So here we go, continuing with work. So I know that my water was darker here and that this is a little bit wet, so I'm just going to tap out with the towel. This paper is pretty interesting. It's basically sketchbook paper. You could do this on any old sketchbook, but this is Stillman and Byrne paper that is heavily sized, and I like the Alpha series. It's the red label, and they make different paper weights, and I just like the thin weight because you can't see through to the back, and this does a good job of the whole point of working on this versus the sketchbook paper. Wouldn't really be able to do the lifting out on the sketchbook paper, but with this paper I can. Lifting out meaning working with the water to recapture some of the light. So again, what is my study? Knowing what is light and what is dark. So if this is the ruffle of lighter foliage down below, I want to vary this shape. I don't want to just have it be resting on that line. So I'm going to have a dip happen here, and I also don't want this interval to be the same as this interval. It's human nature to make things equal. We just can't help it, and it happens. So don't feel bad when it does. There it is. It's easy to fix. And even if you mess it up, again, this is a little too equal. So let's get a pokey thing coming up here. You know, if you think of it as playtime, I'm moving shapes, I'm rearranging stuff. I mean, think of putting a new sofa in your home. You're not going to put it in a doorway where somebody walks into the room. You're going to move it around to where it feels good. You know, I'm going to walk into the room, I want to sit here. This is the same thing with basically something blocking your view here. I want to move into the painting. I want to have interesting shapes so that the viewer's eye is entertained. That's my only goal here. And believe me, I have to work at this. I have to find my way. I've done many failed studies. I've done paintings where I've scraped everything out. So in one of my paintings of this scene, this was a very inspiring scene. This was from Cheverny, and I got to paint there during the last moments of the evening. And yes, it was really spectacular. It was so spectacular, I didn't even know if I could do a painting from it because I was so emotionally involved in the scene. I mean, how do you even paint that? Monet has already done it, and he did it really well. And what was I going to say that was different? And then I just got back to what was exciting, what was capturing my attention on location. And even though the studies that I did on location were, you know, they were okay, but they captured some color that I thought was really great. And so that, based on my memory and those studies, really got me excited, and I worked large, and I had a really good time on those paintings. So in my larger painting, I added a dark shape here, which I thought balanced the shape that was happening here. In the study, in the painting that we're going to be working on today, I think I'm just going to keep it a little more simple with some of these shapes. Let me fix something that's bothering me here. And it's bothering me because I have a big amoeba here. And I quite simply want to break into that. Make this, I'm looking for edge variety. So a bit square or triangular, and same thing happening here. Now you might create fantastic studies. Your shapes might look amazing. This is what mine end up looking like. And as long as they serve the purpose to get me to where I want to go with my painting, I'm going to be okay with that. I don't know, maybe I do half-baked studies on purpose. Whatever works. So this is just a little bit of secondary interest. I thought this area was going to be too blonde over here, just not much going on. Let's see about a shape. I'm curious. It's a big fat what if. What if I did something here? So this is going to be water, a swath of sunlight for the lilies, and this background area that is much lighter, which is what I saw. I saw last light happening. It was falling on the far bank, and it was pretty exciting. Okay, great. Next up, we're going to be understanding some of the concepts, the basic concepts of actually how water reflections work for the human eye. The camera sometimes sees them, in fact, differently. So this, to me, has been really a game changer in organizing some of the crazy photos that I see where every wave is represented. I have 1,000 waves on the water, and what am I going to do with that? Make a confusing painting. And I have done that. So I've learned from my own mistakes, and you can cut to the good stuff, which is organizing your reflections and working with those basic concepts I'm going to present to you next for helping out on understanding how to work better from your photos. Okay, great. So now we're going to get started on understanding all of those water reflection concepts that I was talking about before. Hey, I'd like to mention, no, you don't need to do the studies. I would say that when I present the idea of studies in class, so you don't have to, but I highly encourage you to, because when I present studies in class, the people who do the studies, sometimes they say that the study just helped them tremendously, or they like the study better than the final painting, maybe because there's not much expectation out of the study. So the people who skip to the painting, in fact, learn the hard lesson that the study shows you your weakest point of the painting, the things, or your future painting, I should clarify. So if there's an area that's a little bit weird in shape, that weird shape is going to show up in your painting. So you see these studies that I'm doing and the little bits of understanding with water reflections, color ideas, all of those things. Basically, that's time well spent, because if you envision doing, here I am working this big, and if you were working this big on an oil, it's just going to take a lot larger amount of time and effort to cover that. So it's time well spent. All right, what about water reflections? So we're going to start with some really oddball things, and we're going to do buildings and we're going to do trees. And these are going to be incredibly simplified, but they're going to explain this idea of my water formula, which is water. This is going to be water, and this is going to be my beautiful scene with a red building, and I'm just pulling these out of my head. But what I want to convey to you is this idea about the water reflections. So often when I'm doing a painting with water, I'll paint my reality first, and then I'll match my reflections. Let's just get that water line here. Whoop, all right. So reality, water. So it almost doesn't matter what you put here. Let's get a pine tree. Here we go. World's most beautiful pine tree. Here's a smaller one. It doesn't matter what this is. What's going to matter is what the reflections are going to tell you about it. And sometimes I like to make, I think, you see, this is going to make the point better than if it was an amazing painting that you would want to hang on your wall or a beautiful study. I mean, I've seen those before. But this silly little thing here is going to re-emphasize that concept with the water reflections. Let's say I've got a blue sky with a cloud here. And we're in Maine. We've got some far hills. Whoops, went over. Doesn't really matter. Okay. Enough to get started on the job at hand. So also let's take a look at value, our old friend. We have a light object, we have some medium objects, and we have dark objects. Now let's get started on our water. Just like we saw when we were looking at the photos, I have marked out these interval points where we have this point reflecting to this point, and it's good to know where the water's edge is. In other words, this area is going to be water, and then we have the point at which land happens. So whether this is a dock, whether this is a grassy edge of the stream, or the lake, or the ocean, this is where land is happening. And that is super important. Sometimes this edge varies, it like scoops in or whatever. We're just keeping it straight for understanding the basic principles. So we want to measure from here to the water's edge. Just take that shape down. That's going to follow on a straight line. And this is going to give you your first point of reference for your building. Do we have to start with the building? No, we don't have to. Now let's get into this angled line. Oh, well, first we can do the easier thing, which is this. So that goes there, do-do-do. So to get to this point, we simply measure from here to here. Drop that down. It's going to be about there. And usually it's nicer if these lines are just a little bit wiggly. So we'll just wiggle that up. And you can fill all of this in. Now we're getting back to that point of if you have to know if your object is light, medium, or dark, and then the water is always going to be less than. So we want the water to always be subordinate to reality. We want this to only mimic what is happening in reality. Has to be secondary. Even if the point of your painting, let's say this is where your painting is cropped and it is all about the reflections, you still want that relationship to basically have this be shattered and have the color do what it's going to do. So I want to reiterate that idea of my reflection is not only, like I said before, subordinate to reality, but you want your reflection to be less than. Maybe that's the easier way to think of it. I like to think of it as my object is fill in the blank, therefore, ... my reflection is going to be less than that. So my building is red, guess what? The reflection has to be less red. So let's kill some of that red. So that could work with brightness of color. It's also going to work with value. And I've already given away some of the punchline here. So if your object is medium or light, it reflects darker. Now here's a trick. So most people say, oh yes, I've got that because reflections are always darker. Not true. In fact, reflections can sometimes be lighter than what is in reality. So this goes back to the less than idea. My pine tree is dark. That's defining reality. Therefore, my reflection will be less dark. And sometimes you can pump up reality in preparation for painting your reflection. There we go. my most beautiful trees ever. So also this is following the less than rule for color intensity. My pine tree is dark green. This is less dark green. Crazy enough, cameras just can't capture that. Go ahead and look at something and you'll understand that that is really what's happening. And once you define it, it's kind of amazing. It's like, wow, how did I miss that? Let's just put in some beautiful soft grasses here. So guess what? They could reflect a little bit too. So the less than idea works very well for my building edge is very straight, defining reality. So the reflection will be less perfect, less straight. That's why I did the shattered edge. Let's get to our white cloud. So we want to measure this point to this point, drop it down. Also, you can go from the corner of your building here. So the cloud kind of starts like this. It's a straighter edge. And then, so it's straight and it kind of loops around. And you can measure that out. That's the bottom of the cloud. And that's the top. So my sky is blue. So my reflection, the cloud edge would be less perfect. And my reflection is just going to be a less perfect blue. And also, this is really far off. I know it's a goofy little study, but if I measure this type of blue, this medium to light intensity, and then what is happening here, this is completely undermining what I'm trying to say with reflections. And then we get into another phenomena that happens with water, just when we started understanding all of this, right? What happens is the darker base towards the viewer's feet, in fact, gets a bit darker. So we want this, I think of it as a sky fade. We've got super dark here just for the body of water. And then it goes upwards and it's going to fade to a more medium blue. So it's pretty amazing when you add just something like this. I mean, look how goofy this is, right? But then this will help you understand, let's say you take a workshop in Maine. This is going to help you understand what's going to happen with a lot of complexities along the dock. It's going to help you understand if there's tons of boulders in the stream, what are your basic reflections doing? And then you could add your dark boulders, knowing that your object is dark versus light. So to get this far mountainous area to reflect, so I got this. So I just want to transfer that here. So this is fairly similar. Let's look at something that would be bad. You know, bright green. So your reflection can't be brighter than the tree itself. However, if I did this, you know, maybe this tree is really trying to say something here. Then if I add brighter colors here, I can kind of get away with that in my reflection. But do keep that in mind. I think that was one of the most important ways to help you not only to paint plein air, but to work in the studio from your photos by understanding this really basic concept. Let's just darken that because why? This is still lighter than that, and it was becoming too similar to the value of this shape of the sky. You could do other things as well. So a shape like this where there's a door would quite simply reflect here. But this dark is going to reflect a little less dark. So a window here is going to reflect here. You know, bird in the sky would reflect there. So let me emphasize the idea of angles. I kind of skipped over that before. Angles, I think, cause people a lot of grief. It's very fascinating to me. Some people, they see this once and they're like, oh, cool, I got that. don't be hard on yourself if you say, wait, I've got to go back to square one. I could never work on this type of thing. That looks really complicated. It is complicated, but I think if you break it down into these components, do your scene in reality, then do your measurement points. You could even do these little dots to help you out, and keep things fairly straight. Notice I've picked some basic shapes, and also keep your water's edge fairly straight. So that would be a great way to start, just to understand the ideas that are presented in this little study. Okay, so angles, they do happen. So if we have an angle of the roof here, what we want to do is remember a little trick. I was never good at math. In fact, I should correct myself. I am not very good at math. However, one thing that I took away from math class was these brackets that go to the part of the formula, I guess, that you're supposed to do first, or these days, brackets around email. So little alligator brackets can fit right on your point of land, right? We got water and land. So we use these alligator brackets to help us out. Let's say we have a leaning tree here. It's a little twisty. It's a tree that forgot to leaf out in the spring. So we have a building angle and we have a tree angle. What are we going to do with that? Try for the one that goes to the water's edge first. So we have this point to the water's edge, so we know that the tree is going to start here somewhere. And then we want to match this angle, and we want to match the fluff of the tree. The tree stops here. So the tree is going to stop. Just the tree business stops about there. So that will give you, hey, you could do, fabulous scenes in New England now. We have a lot of what pine trees would do. We have leaning trees. These are all components that would help you to untangle what a photo is trying to dish out. So we've got this angle here, which is floating up. It doesn't engage with this land point here. So we just start with what we know. The line is going to start here and end here. So let's do this point. So we measure that out. So we got a point there. And I've made a little mistake where you see this is a little bit off to the right. I could fix it, or I could just keep the line really wiggly. But in general, you want to keep everything just so right falling on that line. And this brings me to this idea that I like to keep in my brain. When this starts to get too complicated, I think, oh yes, water is about stuff going down, and then you'll see stuff going across. So this idea of gingham stripes or plaid fabric, that helps me a lot. Well, it helps me and my students. I feel really fortunate that my students have all of the questions that they ask, and sometimes they're very afraid to ask the question. They're like, I know what you said, but I just don't understand this concept. So that means I need to find a simpler way of presenting that information. And there's all different types of people who will get all different types of concepts. I present this once, and like I said, somebody might get that right away. Somebody else might need to say, I need to practice that. I might even need to trace some stuff. I have to start really small. I have to work with maybe just one building, one pine tree. That's totally fine. Go at your own pace. So we got this to this, getting back to the job at hand, keeping that on the same line. And then I want to find my center point. This is of that brown roof. Okay, so stuff is kind of lining up a little bit better there. It's going to keep this wiggly. Okay, so it looks, and then we'll do this one. All right, so it's looking arty, but what really happened? I took this angle, so we got this angle and made it happen here. So you could see that the alligator is still happening here. Angle here, angle here. If Let's just add another element. Probably won't work, but oh. We've got beautiful mountain in the background with snow. Okay, so how does that fit into the picture? Those same angles that are happening, just measure this point as to where it starts. Measure the apex of your mountain, even if you have a little bit of a chip here, these bumpies probably won't really show up in the reflection. But anyway, this point, you know what, this just bothered, yeah, I know it's a little goofy drawing, but it just bothers me. It was lining up with that cloud. There we go, that's better. So tip of the mountain, measure that out, coming down. It's here. Double check, is it above where the building is? If I pull a line over here, it's above the building. This looks a little bit equal. Maybe I just drop that down a little bit. Sometimes you don't need to go crazy with all of the representation of these minute details. You just want to get a suggestion of what's happening. And if you have a hot spot of color, let's say for whatever reason, you know, there's a shadow on the mountain. We've got some awesome purple there. So this color also is just going to reflect here. And then you can just start to have some fun with it, because this might be a very fleeting moment in reality. And then if you know that's what happened, let's say the cloud moves in and you're so excited. This is the most awesome thing ever. I've got this purple on the background. I love it. And then you're plein air and, oh, I didn't take a photo and it left. If you know this idea of how reality then reflects, then you'll be able to do this from memory. So that's a big deal for me. All right, next up is understanding this with boats. So we have a little bit more complicated angles, but I think it's just a great way of understanding, again, this component, but doing more angles. Hope you guys are ready.
Would you like to paint exquisite water reflections? Now you can when you study with artist and instructor Christine Lashley in Vibrant Landscapes, a video tutorial course that will help you advance your water reflection and landscape painting skills. Christine will show you how to observe water carefully to see how it behaves so you can create believable water with glistening reflections. She'll reveal her best tips and visual tricks to simplify complex reflections, making them much easier to paint. You'll understand how to identify warm, cool, and even hidden colors found in water scenes, so you'll be able to accurately mix and use the most realistic colors. Many artists do not take the time and effort to study water as a specific skill set. By studying with Christine, you'll gain tremendous knowledge and skill about water movement and reflections, one of the best skills you can possess that will truly set you apart from other painters. There are many variables to consider when painting water. Correct color. Is it moving water or still? Objects that are reflected in the water. Even the depth of the water will make a difference in how you paint it.
We're going to be painting in the studio. However, we're also going to be looking at plein air and how that is going to inform the studio paintings. And the big thing that I hope to get across to you is how to formulate your painting being excited about the moment that we experience outdoors.
Christine shows you how to take each variable, break the process down into steps, and keep your water scenes simple in order to capture the best likeness. You'll love her techniques that will help you paint with less confusion and more confidence. Along with the focus on water and reflections, Christine also shares her best methods for creating beautiful outdoor landscape paintings that match with what you envision. She'll take you through observations, sketches, photo references, studies, and blend that with your memory and imagination. With extensive teaching experience, leading 60 adults per week in art instruction for years, Christine is an excellent instructor as well as a highly accomplished artist. Her art has graced the cover of Plein Air magazine, and she's won many awards for her work. Vibrant Landscapes is your chance to steal Christine's unique abilities for easily expanding your palette, creating more color choices without buying more paint. You'll see Christine demonstrate a full painting from start to finish and also enjoy a digital gallery of some of her best work, as well as an interview with the artist. Available on DVD or instant video. Add Vibrant Landscapes to your resource library today.
Well, that was Vibrant Landscapes with Christine Lashley, and you can learn more about it at lilyartvideo.com. In fact, there's a discount code in the comments section for today only. Make sure you take advantage of that. Now let's get right to our interview with Christine. Hi, I'm Eric Rhodes with Plein Air Magazine, and welcome to Interviews with the Artist. Today we have Christine Lashley. Christine, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, I am so excited. You're such a rock star painter. You're doing such beautiful work that it's like your career's on fire. I'm sure you're an overnight success, right? How long have you been doing this?
Well, I feel like I've been painting for a long time, but I've just really taken it seriously for, I'd say, the past 6 to 7 years. And
that's
entering,
impressive.
Thank you. I just kind of, the kids are getting older, and I thought, what am I waiting for? I have to put myself out there. I have to be risky. I have to enter plein air events. Why not?
So when did the painting begin for you?
Really, things started taking off, like I said, when I entered plein air events. Plein Air Vermont, which doesn't exist anymore, was the first one that I did.
And that's why you did it, and they killed it.
Well, I did get an award, yes.
It can't get any better than this.
It's just, well, first of all, the people that I met there were so nice, and they were people I'd read about in the magazine. I just remember being in the break room, and I'm like, oh, you're Jason Sacron. I know you from the magazine. And
Let me touch your robe.
I know, and he was like, stop, and we just chatted like normal people would, like we are. And it was great. Everybody was so nice. They shared tips. And that was it. I was hooked from then on.
But that's when you decided to apply yourself and really get aggressive about it. So
yes.
When was the first time you picked up a paintbrush or had interest in art?
Really early on. I mean, I've just always been painting, but I never really knew what to do with it. I mean, I went to art school, and you think that they would teach you, and they do. You learn the fundamentals, but then how do you make a career out of it? And I think what we're talking about is, what do you want to visually say? What is it that really excites you? What do you want to paint more than anything else? Mm-hmm. And how do you want to say it? And if it's not getting the recognition it deserves, or if you're not getting into contests, what can you do to better yourself, to really make yourself stand out, to be better?
So where did you go to art school?
I went to Washington University in St. Louis. They have a great art program.
Okay. And so, but it didn't give you the complete picture. So
correct.
You're missing the art business side, and they were teaching you technology, but not feeling? You talked
Well,
about...
you flatter me. It was on the cusp of, computers were entering the graphic design art market, and people were like, I don't know about that.
Mm-hmm. So you entered school, you went to school, you studied. Were you intending this as a career, or was it just something to fill time?
I never thought that I could make it as a painter, so to speak, because who makes it as a painter? So I was thinking graphic design, murals, illustration. So I, in fact, have an illustration degree. And we had great figure drawing, and we did get a great education in that school. Mm-hmm. But it's a broad education.
I think Dean Mitchell went to that school, didn't he? I think so, St. Louis.
Oh, yeah, that sounds familiar. Donna Karen. I mean, a lot of good artists have been there. And in fact, I took fashion classes. It was great to have a sampling of everything.
Did Donna copy your ideas?
Wearing black, yes.
Yeah. And so you get out of school. What happens then?
So I worked graphic design and doing murals. And at a certain point, I just kind of I don't know, I thought, I just don't want to be a graphic designer anymore. I want to do something else. And then I decided to stay at home and have kids.
That'll change everything.
Right, and it did. In fact, my kids were a turning point in my career because I stayed at home with them. I made a commitment to be happy with what I had, which was a beautiful home life, wonderful children. And I started teaching lessons in the evening and started doing children's portraits because all of a sudden people were interesting. My kids were so perfect.
Of course.
And their friends started, we'd have play dates and, hey, who did the art here? Wow, those paintings of kids are cute. Can you paint my kids? And so then I started teaching lessons and doing children's portraits in watercolor.
And what age were your kids at this time? They're pretty young.
Yeah, I mean, let's see, infants to toddlers, and then they entered school, and I started teaching a little bit more.
So you're painting. You're making a little bit of money on the side, kind of thing, or are you making a lot of money?
Yeah, it was a little bit here and there. Plus, it was a chance to be an adult again. Dad's going to put the kids to bed and read them a story, and Mom's going to go teach her art class. Yay!
Yay! You get to get out of the house.
Mom's big night out.
Yeah, right. And so, at what point then did you decide to pursue this on a more serious level? Was it once the kids got to the point where they're in school all day? Was it a point where they're grown?
Well, they had to be a little more self-sufficient, and I am very fortunate in that I have, they started cooking for themselves, first just peanut butter and jelly. Don't worry, Mom, we'll be fine for an hour. And then when I can finally do the plein air events when they were old enough, if they were at home, they could let themselves into the house after school, maybe even make a simple dinner. At first it was don't turn on the stove.
Yeah.
You can reheat what's in the fridge.
Can they do that now?
Yes, they're great. Yes, my kids are definitely old enough to do that.
So when you talk about doing plein air events and you got kids at home, most of these events you're going off for a few days. Were you able to do that, or were you just kind of going out to something that happened to be on a weekend day? Or?
Well, it was a tough transition for the family. They were, on the one hand, very supportive, but sometimes I would get into an event, I got in, I can't believe isn't that great? And the word was, oh, that's great, Mom.
Yeah.
We're so happy for you.
Yeah,
but
you're not going to be home.
Wait, so you're leaving again this month? Yeah, so they're very supportive, though.
So your best advice to somebody who might be viewing this, who might have kids at home, if you look back on how you did it, would you do it any differently? Would you change it up a little bit? Give yourself a little bit of a reward of doing your art a little sooner? What would you do differently?
Well, that's a great question because at the time that I was transitioning like that, plein air events were kind of newer. And so the infrastructure that you've built, even reintroducing Plein Air Magazine, that's just really raised the awareness. And I think that anybody who is in my situation now has a better chance of getting into events. You could do a smaller weekend event. There's so many more. There's contests. You have the online contests. None of that was happening to the degree that it is now when I was starting out. So it was kind of an uphill battle. So I think the avenue is kind of wide open now. There's so much opportunity.
Big change. When we started the magazine, I don't think there were more than five events nationwide, maybe 6. But today there are over 250. So it's changed a lot. That means
changed a lot.
250 events means they got to get 15, 20, 30, 50, 60 artists for each event. That's a lot more opportunity.
A lot of opportunity. And there's really good cash money now. At first the prizes were, $500, $1,000. That was considered top prize. And now you can have $10,000. Yeah.
Not bad for doing a couple paintings.
That's right. Not bad for a week's worth of work.
So you are, how would you categorize yourself as a painter?
Well, there's labels that you can put to that, painterly realism, but honestly, a big turning point for me, just going back a little bit in time also in the interview, I just feel like I'm learning more than ever. On the one hand, I know what I like, I know what my aesthetic is, but I feel like the more I think I know, better things happen when I start at ground zero and I approach just a painting as a curious thing. What if I did that? Hey, I'm going to try this. And I do my go-to subject matter, of course. I'm not reinventing the wheel each time. I don't mean to say that. But approaching things more as a scholar and trusting in the process. So, I'm exploring when I approach a campus.
Well, that's one of the things I've noticed about the artists that get to the top of their game is they never stop exploring. They're always experimenting. The ones that get stagnant are the ones that do the same thing over and over again year after year. But the ones who are, even top artists, the very, very top artists have told me that they'll take a workshop from someone else, someone who might even be considered a lesser artist than they are in some ways, but they know that this person has a gift in a particular area, or maybe not a gift, because I don't really believe it's about gifts as much as it is about passion and development, putting in the time. And so they'll go learn from you, for instance, or from somebody else. I mean, I first learned about you from Scott Christensen. So you're on the radar of the big guns.
He's a wonderful person. He's a great example of somebody who never stops learning. And he says he learns from me, so what higher flattery is that?
Absolutely, yeah. Well, and your work is beautiful, and there's a lot to be learned from it. So are you a studio painter, a plein air painter, a both combination? Is there a way to delineate that?
I used to consider myself just a plein air painter. I actually started in watercolor, and I've transitioned into oils, but and it's one of the reasons I ended up taking Scott's workshop. I love the idea of taking workshops at intervals, regardless of where you're at. And sorry, I forgot the first part of the question.
I don't remember it either.
Okay, well, we're chatting anyway.
Hey, how about those Mets?
That's right. No, but just transitioning from watercolor to oil and having that curious mindset, that's what just continues to lead to some good things.
And why did you transition out of watercolor?
I think I was just curious about oils, and what was holding me back was the use of solvent. I found out I was allergic. I would get hives and kind of get dizzy, and so then I did a whole lot of research on different ways to approach your canvas and not use any type of solvent product whatsoever.
So let's talk about that. What would that be? What's that look like?
Well, it could be really simple in the fact that I just don't use solvent. So I use everything else. I'm using traditional oils, water mixable. I can even use some mediums, such as Gamblin solvent-free gel that does not contain solvent. Or you can be complex about it and say, I start with the water mixable underpainting and to mimic the look of the solvent. And then I actually, when I'm doing the idea of fat over lean, the underpainting is the watery stuff in the water mixable. And it all works pretty well. Sounds like I've got too much equipment to be working with there, but it works.
So in terms of plein air painting, for the people who might be watching this, they're not a plein air painter, maybe they don't even know about it or haven't experienced it. What do you learn if you have been painting in your studio your whole life, or in the back bedroom or whatever, and you maybe you're painting from photographs or copying other things? What happens when you start going outside? What changes?
Oh, such a good question.
Thank you.
Plein air is like everything. It all has to start there.
Has to.
Yes, because as humans, we are outside, we're interacting with, nature's just the ultimate teacher. You can take as many workshops as you want, but you're just going to learn from going outside and seeing. Somebody could tell you till they're blue in the face and you're blue in the face, here's how you paint a rock, here's how you paint a tree. But you just go out and you look at it. And then some of the ideas that you can almost see things click in people's brains when they're looking and a teacher is describing. It's like, oh, so that's what you mean when, and Carlson was talking about this, and you're like, yes, that's right. It's all coming together.
So for those who don't know who Carlson is,
well, Carlson's Guide to Landscape Painting is kind of what...
Published in what, 1930 or something?
Right. It's been reissued how many times? Like
yeah. It's a classic.
Dozen times. Yes, one would say he knows all the answers, but he's also of the school that you never stop learning. And he's still looking for answers as the book progresses. So we're trying to finish we're standing on his shoulders, in essence.
So when you write your book, and you have three primary principles that you have to communicate to people that are more essential than anything else, what would those three be?
Well, going outside and working plein air, I just don't think you can get enough of that. Even if nothing comes from the painting, just making the effort to put down some color bars and color notes. And then what we talked about, just continuing to learn. It doesn't mean grabbing unessential information, not just, let's learn, let's take a million workshops. You can take a workshop and not like what the teacher said, but actually you have learned something about yourself. So being mindful of your own values and your own aesthetic as somebody else is presenting information. And so that could be paintings on a wall in a museum, could be at a workshop, could be at the convention when somebody's talking or doing a demo. You can actually disagree with their choice of red. It's your prerogative, but be actively learning about yourself in that regard. So third thing, in fact, make time for some other hobbies. Sometimes I feel like art is so all-consuming. I mean, I've cut down on so many of my other hobbies. I try to do cooking and gardening. I'm down to just those other two things. They take up a little piece of the pie now.
What were the other ones?
Oh gosh, everything from horseback riding to quilting to, I tried knitting, and yeah, I was into all types of stuff. But painting is number one now.
Well, the nice thing about gardening is you can create your still life subjects, right?
Right.
Go outside. So you mentioned the convention. The people watching this might not know what you meant when you said that.
Mm-hmm. So the Plein Air Convention that is being put on once a year, it's a big celebration of plein air, which is the idea of painting outside. Just what got me so excited before. The numbers were huge, the people that attended, but it felt like an intimate gathering because you got to see some new people, old people that maybe you had seen before. It was great.
It's kind of, I think of it like Thanksgiving, it's like going home and being around this big giant table with all these people that, except, Uncle Harry's not there.
It's your kindred spirit family reunion, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, people who like the same things that you like, your tribe.
Yep, exactly. I remember you mentioning that, I think, and it's just at the address opening or closing, and it just couldn't be more true. You just kind of started getting warm and fuzzy in the room, like, oh, all these people like this stuff too. Yay.
Well, I think the community is such an important part of being an artist. And what tends to happen is that those of us who are not out participating in plein air groups or plein air paint-outs is that we kind of get isolated. We get stuck at home. We're sitting in our studios and painting away, and oftentimes we're alone. It's just our families. Right. And I think that community seems to be a really important aspect for an artist, whether it's the Plein Air Convention, the idea of once a year, at least going and reconnecting with all these people. You're in community because you're going to some of the plein air events and connecting with other artists at those things. And also you're able to talk to collectors and so on.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned that. We're talking about that sense of community because I think I used to think it was about what I was thinking and feeling, but you're right. It's connecting with other artists and being open to what they say. I learned from my students. I hope that my students are learning from me. And it's that sense of camaraderie seeing what somebody else is excited about, hearing different presentations, snatches of conversation I heard in the hall in the Plein Air Convention, all of those things just kind of support your growth as an artist in maybe ways you don't know about until later. I think it's the full benefit is reached maybe 2 weeks after when you're like, wow, I'm processing that.
Well, when I was developing this concept, I thought, I've gone to so many demos and things and watched them, but then I kind of forget what I learned. And what I thought is if you can take it and apply it that day, so you're watching somebody famous like you on stage, and then you teach me how to make my painting sparkle or something, and then I go outside and I apply that. Not only do I apply it, but you're around, I can go find you and ask you, hey, I need help here. But also, I'm cementing it in my head right then and there because there's so much information otherwise. And then you're right, over the next, I found that, for several weeks after, I'm like pulling things out that I picked up at the convention, because I try to, even though I organize it, I'm trying to sit in on it, because that's really why I created it, so I could go to something like
I
this.
know, I was going to say, so do you paint at the convention?
I do.
Oh, good,
Yeah.
good. I wondered that.
Yeah, it's very important to me, and yet I want to be out and talking to people. But
Right.
yeah, I think that's it's like this is what needed to be done. This is what I would like in my life, and that's quite frankly why I created it. I thought if I'd want it, some other people would want it. So
Yeah,
go ahead.
well, I was going to say, what you're touching on is that Zen moment where you're in the zone of doing the painting, and sometimes a trick or a tip that you saw, like at the demo, and you're like, oh yeah, I want to go try that. And the faster you can get in your zone, the better. So if somebody just tips the scales to all of a sudden making your painting click and work for you, what a gift is that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's really also cool to be out there, you're part of history. You're out there painting the Golden Gate Bridge, and there's like more painters than you've ever seen in your life together. And yet, if you walk, you take a break and you walk from painter to painter, you could walk and look at everyone and you would not see two paintings alike.
It's so true.
And it's kind of a great educational experience.
Well, and you can find little pockets of people. It's great to see the whole crowd there, which is very exciting, and walk, here's a painting. But also I heard of stories where people said, yeah, there were just 2 or 3 of us, and we went over the hill and there was nobody around. It was so peaceful and quiet. So
Right.
you have the big crowd and the hubbub if you want it, but you can also go find your little nook.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah.
So for the people who are kind of at the beginning stages of learning, what's the best advice you can give them other than the 3 points you gave me before? What's the best advice is in terms of you're going to learn to paint, here's what you need to expect, here's what you need to maybe anticipate or expect, and here are the things that you really need to be focusing on.
Well, I've been teaching for 20 years, so I've seen a lot of beginners, and I think really your only requirement, because often people are like, I'm not sure I'm good enough, I'm not ready, and in a certain regard, you're never going to be ready, nor should you be. Part of the job of either a plein air convention, a workshop, or even facing the blank canvas is, let's get over that fear that, okay, now we're just going to try. We're going to try to do this thing. And we're just going to be present and show up. So if somebody's nervous about the level of skill required to do something, I say all you really need is a positive attitude. Mm-hmm. I will show you which end of the paintbrush to use, not to worry.
The one with hair on it, right?
That's right. Actually, I use both sides of mine today. So
Yeah.
for my signature, I use the other. But no, I'm just joking around. But it's a good question, and I think it's number one for beginners. They're worried I might not be good enough and everybody else is going to be better than me. But the person who does the workshop with a smile and I'm just going to try this, and maybe they come with no expectations as to performance, and they're the ones who are going to get the most out of it, because with no expectations, you just can go up, right?
Well, and I hear from people who do workshops that there are people who come to workshops and they'll watch the demo, but they're not doing anything that they're being taught. They're just kind of going in the path that they're comfortable with. But talk about the value of pushing yourself outside of your comfort zone.
Yeah, and people have different levels of doing that, I think. And as a teacher, I try to respect that. But I especially can speak personally, and that the more I push myself, the more I open myself up to trying to be comfortable with failure. Okay, I'm doing a demo now. Could be the worst painting ever. Could be. But let's just see what happens. Let's talk it through. And really, if you have certain tools, it could be very simple, like just knowing a little bit more about your materials or taking a workshop. Just that idea of getting over that hump and trying. I mean, it makes all the difference. I mean, it really does. You just have to be open to failure. It's a good thing. It doesn't have to be a bad thing.
Yeah, I think the hardest thing for me to learn when I started painting was that I would get really invested in the canvas that I had just created. You know, I'd fall in love with it for whatever reason, and it took an instructor coming over one day and then scraping everything off of it and saying, "Here, start over." And I was mortified.
Yeah.
But he said, "Look, you've got to get to the point where you're not worrying about whether it's good or bad right now.
Right.
You know, your drawing was off. You're never going to be able to fix it. Let's start over and get it right, and let me show you how." And so not being invested in that canvas, because that, you know, we fall in love, we all fall in love with the cool things that we think we're doing until we look at them 20 years later.
Well, I think the cadence is, and people can attend the Plein Air Convention and be on any angle of the spectrum, but I think when you're a beginner, it just feels good to push paint around. So, you know, yeah, get a knife and just squish it around. That's a great painting because you had fun.
That's right.
And there's something to be said for that exuberance on canvas. And then as you progress as a student, if you're asking questions, if you're checking in with yourself, if you're observing nature, you say, yes, but how do I get the sunlight to fall on that tree? Exactly just so. I'm curious. I would be willing to fail on many yellow tree paintings in order to find the answer to that question. So then you start progressing along. Then you have expectations about your painting. So this is when, you know, you've left the pure exuberance. I've actually heard people say, I used to have more fun painting. I'm so frustrated now. And I say, it's okay, because you're learning. Let's check in with you. Doesn't that feel good? And they're like, oh, yes, it does. So.
Yeah, I was painting I had a small study that I did in Canada in the mountains, and I did a big painting of it, and I had done part of it, and it was going really well, and the trees were looking really good. And my wife walked into my studio, and she said, don't mess with those trees. Those are perfect. And the minute she said that, I had to mess with them.
Oh.
And not because of her, but I realized that the trees were drawing all the attention in the painting, and they weren't supposed to.
Oh.
And even though I had done them well, I thought, well, if I did them once, I can figure out how to do it again. And
that's a good
so
attitude.
I scraped it down and redid it and redid the drawing and changed everything. And it's still a bad painting, but it.
Oh, come on.
No, but it won't always be, right?
Okay.
But in other words, you have to be willing to be flexible.
So you're enjoying the process.
Not always. I mean, do you have moments when you're painting and you go,
sure.
oh, I should give this up?
Right. There's always moments when you think, what did I just do? I don't understand. How did that happen?
Yeah. Well, for me, it's when I'm getting lazy. Like, you know, if I'm tired or I haven't put enough paint out and I'm like trying to make other colors work because I don't want to go get another tube of paint. Or, you know, so I think that you got to get away from it once in a while. You have to give yourself some breathing room. It's not always easy to do if you're in a quick draw or something, but.
I know, speaking of quick draw, I love quick draw.
You do?
I do. I'm like one of the freaky individuals that loves that.
Yeah, you like pressure?
I never would have thought so. Here we are here I am having to do my demo. And even teaching, I was extremely shy, totally introverted. I would never be able to talk and paint at the same time. This was me long ago. And so I think it's been, baby steps to overcome that. Mm-hmm. And I mean, watercolor teaches you something. You can't really be afraid with watercolor because it shows on the page.
Yes, everything shows.
And so what I found at the Plein Air quick draws is that you just don't have time to second guess everything. I mean, there's time to slow down. This is what happens with my studio paintings. I slow way down, I reassess everything. It's a different experience. And to some degree, my ultimate experience is it feels very pure. The Plein Air quick draw, it like just squeezes everything out of me. All my creativity comes out. And it just feels so good, and I'm in just pure paint mode. There's almost no cerebral, it's just complete reaction. And you could think of it as practice versus performance. You know, I've been practicing, I have all my skills, I've done my learning, and then poof, there's my performance. So I don't know, it feels good. What can I say? Maybe I'm an adrenaline junkie, I don't know.
Well, that's good.
Closet adrenaline junkie.
Well, I think that one of the things I've learned is if you think too much, sometimes you create problems for yourself. You know, when you're under the pressure, you're operating on instinct, not so much just thinking about everything. You know, it's like the best paintings I've ever done in my life were 15-minute paintings.
There you go.
Where I had the sun was going down, the wind was blowing, I'm holding the easel down with one hand, and it's like in psychotherapy, they do these things to distract you so that your brain is. I've never been. Well, okay, maybe that one time, but it's this idea that you know you're not overcompensating for things because you're just like big brushstrokes
It's
trying to
instinct.
get it down. And sometimes those are the best, most
Yep.
beautiful paintings.
I think that's exactly it. That complements what I was trying to describe before. That moment of just gestural, this and that. And that's when we're talking about plein air, when we're talking about the convention, that's basically what's on everybody's mind, is that moment where it's pure reaction to the scene. You're just so overcome with excitement to capture that on canvas. How do you school yourself so that you can do that? How do you let yourself go so that you could do that? And how do you just be present? I mean, you were there on that mountaintop doing your quick thing. That's why that happened, because you had showed up and let it happen.
Right.
Yeah.
You got to put yourself out there.
You have to do it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Any final words for our friends out there?
Well, it's just been a great experience. I mean, one mental trick I was doing for myself this week was, hey, it's a week-long quick draw. Bring it on. We're going to have fun and make these videos. So I'm looking forward to the same for the Plein Air Convention. Can't wait.
Cool.
Yeah.
Well, we're honored to have you here. It's really fun watching your career, and I just know it's just going to continue to soar.
Thanks,
I
Eric.
think people are going to love what you do, and it's just terrific to get to know you a little bit.
Wow, thanks so much for having me out. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Well, that was Christine Lashley and Vibrant Landscapes, and you can learn more about it at lilyartvideo.com. And don't forget, there's a special discount code in the comments for today only. Thanks for watching. I'm Eric Rhodes.
Would you like to paint exquisite water reflections? Now you can when you study with artist and instructor Christine Lashley in Vibrant Landscapes, a video tutorial course that will help you advance your water reflection and landscape painting skills. Christine will show you how to observe water carefully to see how it behaves so you can create believable water with glistening reflections. She'll reveal her best tips and visual tricks to simplify complex reflections, making them much easier to paint. You'll understand how to identify warm, cool, and even hidden colors found in water scenes, so you'll be able to accurately mix and use the most realistic colors. Many artists do not take the time and effort to study water as a specific skill set. By studying with Christine, you'll gain tremendous knowledge and skill about water movement and reflections, one of the best skills you can possess that will truly set you apart from other painters. There are many variables to consider when painting water. Correct color. Is it moving water or still? Objects that are reflected in the water. Even the depth of the water will make a difference in how you paint it.
We're going to be painting in the studio. However, we're also going to be looking at plein air and how that is going to inform the studio paintings. And the big thing that I hope to get across to you is how to formulate your painting being excited about the moment that we experience outdoors.
Christine shows you how to take each variable, break the process down into steps, and keep your water scenes simple in order to capture the best likeness. You'll love her techniques that will help you paint with less confusion and more confidence. Along with the focus on water and reflections, Christine also shares her best methods for creating beautiful outdoor landscape paintings that match with what you envision. She'll take you through observations, sketches, photo references, studies, and blend that with your memory and imagination. With extensive teaching experience, leading 60 adults per week in art instruction for years, Christine is an excellent instructor as well as a highly accomplished artist. Her art has graced the cover of Plein Air magazine, and she's won many awards for her work. Vibrant Landscapes is your chance to steal Christine's unique abilities for easily expanding your palette, creating more color choices without buying more paint. You'll see Christine demonstrate a full painting from start to finish and also enjoy a digital gallery of some of her best work, as well as an interview with the artist. Available on DVD or instant video. Add Vibrant Landscapes to your resource library today.